Morning light spills across the Roman Forum, pale and unforgiving, catching on marble columns and bronze statues as if searching for flaws, and the general walks through it, aware that victory never truly ends a war. It only changes the shape of enemies waiting quietly in its shadow. He has returned with triumphs announced and spoils counted, yet whispers follow him through the colonnades, carried by senators who smile too easily, because in Rome a reputation can be undone faster than an army, and memory is shaped by those who speak last, not those who fought hardest. At the edge of his household, beyond the atrium where guests are received, a young slave woman moves silently between tasks, her head lowered as custom demands, though her eyes observe everything, trained by necessity to read danger in tone, posture, and pauses others dismiss. She was taken during the campaign, her former life reduced to a line in a ledger, yet she has learned quickly that Roman houses survive on secrets more than strength, and that listening carefully can sometimes protect better than obedience alone. You probably won't survive this story unmarked, but before we continue, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, because in Rome, allegiance given without choice has always ended badly. If you're listening late, leave your city and local time in the comments. I like imagining quiet lamps burning far from the forum. Now, dim the lights, let the noise fall away and step with me into a Rome that rarely speaks softly. The general removes his armour in private, hands lingering on dents earned honestly, aware that Rome honours results, not methods, and that questions about conduct in war can be sharpened into weapons when politics require a sacrifice. A historical truth presses close. Roman generals were celebrated publicly, but scrutinized relentlessly afterward, with accusations of cruelty or treason often surfacing once power shifted, because Rome forgave defeat more easily than it forgave independence. The slave woman overhears fragments while serving wine, names, dates, suggestions of misconduct, and she understands that these words, spoken casually, could unravel him entirely if carried into the wrong ears at the wrong hour. She says nothing, because survival teaches restraint, yet memory stores every syllable, and she begins to recognize patterns in how senators speak when they intend destruction, but prefer not to dirty their own hands. A quirky belief from her homeland returns to her, that names carry weight beyond bodies, and to steal a name is to steal a future, and she wonders whose future is being quietly prepared for burial. The general senses unease without knowing its source, the way soldiers sense ambush before it forms, and he begins to watch the city more carefully, noting who greets him warmly and who avoids his gaze altogether. Historians still argue whether Roman political trials were driven more by justice or convenience, debating records shaped by survivors. But even now, walking these streets, it is clear truth bends easily when power requires it. That evening, as torches are lit and shadows stretch across the atrium floor, the slave woman pauses, realizing she knows something Rome does not yet, and that knowledge has placed a quiet, dangerous weight in her keeping. In a city built on remembrance and erasure, two lives begin to intersect, not through choice or romance, but through proximity to a truth that will soon demand far more than silence from either of them. The days that follow unfold with careful ceremony, receptions held beneath painted ceilings, while the general smiles through congratulations, all the while measuring conversations for hidden barbs, because in Rome praise often arrives sharpened, wrapped in silk but designed to cut when least expected. The slave woman moves among guests unnoticed, refilling cups and arranging couches, her presence dismissed by rank, yet her ears catch what others miss, fragments of accusation spoken as jest, questions framed as concern, each one testing whether the general's name will fracture under pressure. She learns quickly which senators speak too loudly when lying, which glance away when truth approaches, patterns that reveal more than documents ever could, and she understands that knowledge here is currency, though she herself possesses no legal right to spend it. A historical reality shadows her steps. Slaves in Rome could be punished for repeating overheard conversations, even when truth was spoken, because the law protected status, not accuracy, and silence was often safer than honesty for those without names. The general notices her stillness one afternoon, the way she pauses when certain names are spoken, and though he does not address her, instinct marks the observation, a soldier's habit of noting small changes before larger shifts arrive. A quirky Roman belief surfaces among the household staff, that the Heiress, guardian spirits of the home, listen through servants rather than masters, and some whisper that those who overhear fate too clearly invite it closer by paying attention. Late that evening, she overhears the true intent behind the rumours, that rivals plan to accuse the general of unauthorised brutality during the campaign, charges that could strip him of command and reduce his victories to scandal within a single session of the Senate. She weighs the danger carefully, knowing that speaking could bring punishment or worse, yet remaining silent would allow a lie to harden into record, and she understands with quiet clarity that Rome remembers what is written, not what is lived. Historians still argue whether slaves ever influenced political outcomes directly, citing sparse evidence and erased testimonies, but standing there, she realizes power does not always announce itself. Sometimes it listens patiently, waiting for the precise moment to move. The general's household grows tense, messengers arriving more frequently, their whispers heavy with urgency, and she senses the narrowing corridor of time, the space where decisions must soon be made regardless of consequence. One night, as the atrium empties, she follows him at a careful distance, her heart steady despite fear, because fear has already taken enough from her, and if a name is to be stolen, she will not allow it without resistance. She speaks at last, quietly, choosing words with deliberate care, revealing what she's heard without accusation, without plea, simply laying truth at his feet as one might lay down a weapon surrendered but not discarded. The general listens in silence, shock restrained behind discipline, because soldiers know when a warning is genuine, and he understands immediately the cost of hearing it from her mouth. A line once spoken by Roman jurist echoes faintly. Truth offered by the powerless is still truth, even if Rome pretends otherwise, and for the first time he sees her not as property, but as witness. In that moment their fates knot together, not through affection, but through a shared awareness that saving a name in Rome often requires someone else to risk losing theirs entirely. News of the coming accusation spreads through Rome with practiced subtlety carried in pauses and polite inquiries, and the general senses the city recalibrating around him, allies stepping back just enough to avoid sharing his fall should the Senate decide his name has become inconvenient. The slave woman watches this shift unfold from the margins, noting how invitations thin and conversations shorten. And she understands that Rome does not attack openly when reputation alone can be bled dry through implication and delay. She continues her duties carefully, knowing every movement is observed now, not because she matters, but because proximity itself has become suspect, and suspicion in Rome spreads faster than proof ever does. A historical truth sharpens her caution. Roman slaves were often interrogated under torture in legal disputes, especially when testimony threatened elite interests. And the knowledge settles coldly in her chest as she weighs how much more she can risk. The general meets with advisors who urge silence, compromise, and sacrifice of lesser names to protect greater ones, a familiar Roman strategy. Yet each suggestion tightens his jaw, because he knows the truth will not survive another man speaking for it. A quirky detail from household gossip surfaces. Scribes have already prepared alternate records of the campaign, drafts that soften victories and magnify alleged excess, ready to replace memory once approved by those in power. The slave woman overhears plans for an informal inquiry, a trial without public record, designed to conclude before witnesses can gather courage, and she realizes this is where names disappear quietly, preserved only as warnings to others. She approaches the general again, urging urgency through gesture and tone, explaining that delay favors his enemies, and though fear flickers in her eyes, her voice remains steady, shaped by survival rather than hope. Historians still argue whether Roman justice was ever impartial for powerful men debating surviving transcripts stripped of context. But here, in the narrowing corridors of time, impartiality already feels like a myth politely maintained. The general makes a decision that night, one shaped by command rather than comfort, instructing trusted scribes to preserve original records and ordering his household sealed against intrusion, an act that signals resistance more loudly than any speech. With that decision, danger sharpens immediately. Guards posted not for protection but observation, messengers intercepted, and the slave woman understands she has crossed from witness to participant, a transition Rome rarely forgives. She burns scraps of notes she has kept, committing details fully to memory, because written proof can be destroyed. But memory, though dangerous, travels more quietly when hidden inside those already dismissed. The general watches her work with calm intensity, recognizing discipline equal to any soldier's, and he begins to understand that loyalty forged without reward often holds firmer than that purchased with promise. A line whispered among soldiers returns to him, that wars are not lost on battlefields, but in rooms where no one dares speak plainly, and he realizes this war has reached its most perilous phase. As dawn approaches, Rome holds its breath, unaware that the preservation of one name now depends entirely on a woman the city insists does not exist. The inquiry begins without announcement, convened at a private villa beyond the forum where marble walls absorb sound and discretion is mistaken for justice, and the general arrives knowing that verdicts reached in such places rarely require evidence, only consensus shaped beforehand. He stands before men who once praised him openly, now avoiding his gaze as questions unfold carefully, framed to imply guilt without ever naming it, because Rome excels at accusation disguised as concern for order and morality. The slave woman waits beyond the hall, stationed deliberately far from proceedings, yet messengers pass near enough for her to hear fragments, phrases rehearsed, conclusions hinted, confirming her fear that the outcome is being written faster than truth can interrupt. A historical fact weighs heavily here. Roman legal practice often excluded direct testimony from slaves unless extracted under coercion, ensuring that inconvenient witnesses remained silent while the appearance of procedure was maintained. Inside, the general is urged to accept a private censure, a symbolic reduction of honours that would spare public disgrace, and he understands the offer clearly: survival in exchange for obedience, memory reshaped to suit the Senate's comfort. A quirky Roman custom echoes faintly. Names removed from public praise were not erased entirely, but allowed to fade quietly, a punishment gentler than damnatio memoriae, yet equally effective in teaching compliance. Outside, the slave woman makes her choice, stepping forward to intercept a scribe carrying preliminary notes, speaking urgently, revealing inconsistencies only someone present could know, and in doing so, placing herself directly in Rome's line of punishment. Historians still argue whether individual acts could alter Roman political outcomes, debating isolated cases lost to incomplete records, but this interruption stalls the inquiry just long enough for doubt to surface among men who depend on certainty. The scribe hesitates, recognizing truth where convenience expected silence and delays delivery, a small act that fractures the smooth progress of condemnation more sharply than open defiance ever could. Guards seize the slave woman immediately, her intervention answered with swift restraint, yet the damage is done. The inquiry pauses, tempers rise, and the general senses the shift, realizing someone has spoken where no one meant to. He demands her presence, invoking procedural rights few remember but still respect, forcing the inquiry into open tension, and the room tightens as authority collides with exposure. A murmur spreads among the men present, because Rome fears disorder more than injustice, and her words, though unwelcome, have introduced unpredictability into a process designed to avoid it. The inquiry adjourns without resolution, an outcome rare and dangerous, leaving reputation suspended rather than destroyed, and the general understands the cost of this delay will not be paid by him alone. She's led away without protest, eyes calm despite fear, because she's already chosen which danger she prefers to face, and silence is no longer among them. As night settles over the villa, Rome absorbs the disruption quietly, unaware that one name has been preserved only because another now stands exposed to the full weight of its laws. She's held in a narrow chamber beneath the villa, stone walls damp with age, the air carrying the scent of old water and iron, and though fear presses close, her breathing remains measured because survival has taught her that panic wastes strength needed for endurance. Above her, the inquiry dissolves into argument, senators divided between preserving convenience and containing disruption, and the general listens with sharpened focus, aware that delay has bought time but not safety, because Rome rarely forgives those who force it to hesitate publicly. A historical truth weighs heavily now. Slaves who interfered in elite proceedings were often punished not for lying, but for presuming relevance, a transgression Rome considered more dangerous than falsehood itself. The general demands her release into his custody, framing the request as necessity rather than mercy, invoking household authority that still carries legal weight, and though resistance meets him, uncertainty has weakened the resolve of men who prefer smooth outcomes. A quirky Roman legal loophole surfaces. Masters bore responsibility for slaves' conduct, meaning punishment could rebound politically, and some senators hesitate, calculating risk with care sharpened by self-interest rather than justice. She is brought before them briefly, wrist-bound, posture upright, and when asked to repeat what she said, she does so without embellishment, understanding that clarity, not persuasion, is her only defense in a room that does not value her voice. Historians still argue whether such testimonies ever mattered without force behind them, but in this moment, her consistency fractures the narrative meant to end the inquiry swiftly. The general watches her speak and understands fully that his name now rests on her restraint as much as her courage, and that whatever survival awaits him will carry her shadow permanently within it. The inquiry concludes not with verdict, but with postponement, an outcome both rare and costly, and as senators depart, the general is warned quietly that Rome's patience has limits, especially when challenged from below. That night, under the cover of administrative confusion, he orders papers prepared and witnesses contacted, knowing the only protection left is decisive action, and that protecting her will require a sacrifice Rome will never record kindly. Before dawn, the general moves through his household with controlled urgency, issuing orders that sound routine but carry irrevocable weight, arranging travel papers, sealed tablets, and witnesses willing to speak if summoned, because in Rome preparation is the only form of mercy power ever allows itself. He visits her chamber personally, guards dismissed with clipped authority, and explains in measured tones that her safety now endangers his position, yet abandoning her would undo everything she protected, and she understands instantly that gratitude in Rome is proven only through cost. A historical fact presses between them. Manumission, though legal, required public record and justification, and freeing a slave tied to political controversy invited scrutiny sharper than chains, scrutiny that could fracture even a celebrated career beyond repair. He offers her a choice framed honestly: freedom written quietly into documents that will erase her from his household, but also from protection, or continued custody under his name, safer for now, but binding her fate to his own uncertain standing. She answers without hesitation, choosing freedom despite its danger because survival taught her that belonging without agency is simply another form of disappearance, and she would rather face Rome unseen than remain protected by a silence that consumes her. A quirky Roman custom surfaces then. Freed slaves often took their former master's name, a shadow of identity, both gift and burden, and she accepts it calmly, knowing that carrying his name will preserve his longer than it ever preserves her. Historians still argue whether acts of manumission were altruistic or strategic, debating motives lost to official phrasing. But here the truth rests plainly: it is both, and neither diminishes the weight of what is being surrendered. The papers are sealed, witnesses sworn, and by mid-morning her status changes quietly, without ceremony, the transformation from property to person, marked only by ink drying on wax and the general's expression tightening with irreversible resolve. Rome receives the news cautiously, noting his compliance with procedure while murmuring about unnecessary generosity, and though his name stabilizes publicly, power shifts subtly away from him, ambition retreating where independence once stood. She leaves before sunset, walking alone through streets that no longer claim her yet offer no shelter, carrying a new name, fragile freedom, and the knowledge that her sacrifice has saved a legacy she will never be allowed to share. The Senate reconvenes weeks later with the predictability of ritual, and the general stands again among men who now greet him with measured respect, because Rome prefers stability restored quietly to justice pursued openly, and his preserved name signals that disruption has been successfully contained. Official records confirm his campaign without censure, victories intact, accusations softened into footnotes, and the city resumes its careful forgetting, because Rome's memory functions best when guided by convenience rather than truth. A historical truth settles uneasily here. Many Roman trials ended not with verdicts, but with adjusted narratives, allowing power to proceed uninterrupted, while the appearance of order remained polished and intact. The general accepts new appointments without celebration, aware that advancement now comes with invisible limits, because Rome rewards compliance even as it quietly distrusts those who have resisted too openly. Beyond the Forum, the freedwoman navigates the city's margins, learning which streets welcome her new name and which doors remain closed, because freedom in Rome does not arrive with belonging, only with the absence of ownership. A quirky detail shadows her days. Freed women often retained informal ties to former households for survival, yet she avoids them deliberately, understanding that safety purchased through dependence would undo the very choice she made beneath the villa. Historians still argue whether freed slaves could ever escape the identities Rome imposed upon them, debating inscriptions that record names but erase voices, and as she moves through crowded markets, she feels that erasure working silently around her. The general hears reports of her from intermediaries, resisting the urge to intervene, because protection now would expose both of them, and gratitude in Rome is safest when expressed through restraint rather than rescue. Their lives proceed in parallel, close enough to feel the gravity of one another, distant enough to avoid collision, bound by an unspoken agreement that survival requires separation as much as sacrifice. When they pass once briefly at a public festival, they do not acknowledge one another, yet the exchange of a single glance carries more truth than any speech Rome would permit them to share. Years later, Rome remembers the general as steady, disciplined, unremarkable in his longevity, a man whose name endured without stain, and he understands this endurance as both survival and sentence, because what is preserved too carefully often loses the freedom to change or confess what it cost. He walks the Forum more slowly now, listening to younger men repeat arguments he once survived, and he recognizes how history smooths danger into instruction, transforming near ruin into respectable precedent without ever acknowledging the hands that held it back from collapse. A historical truth lingers beneath his steps. Rome rarely honored those who prevented injustice quietly, preferring heroes who conquered loudly, and so the most decisive acts remained buried beneath procedure, memory trimmed to fit public comfort. The freed woman lives beyond the city's centre, her days shaped by work that demands little notice, her name carried forward in records that say nothing of why it matters, and she learns how invisibility, once forced, can become a chosen form of safety. A quirky belief from her childhood returns to her often, that names spoken too loudly invite misfortune, and she carries hers carefully now, aware it holds another's legacy more securely than it ever held her own. Historians still argue whether Roman history is shaped more by power or omission, debating which silences were deliberate and which accidental, but her life answers quietly. Omission is power's most efficient instrument. When news of the general's death finally reaches her, unremarkable and orderly, she marks the day alone, not with grief, but with recognition, understanding that his name survived because hers was never allowed to compete with it. She burns nothing, keeps nothing written, trusting memory to do what records never could, preserving truth without challenging a world that has already decided whose truth it will tolerate. In Rome, statues remain, names endure, and citizens repeat the story as they were taught, unaware that preservation itself was once a fragile act balanced on the restraint of a woman history chose not to see. And so the city moves on, remembering one name fully, forgetting another entirely, while the space between them where sacrifice lived remains the truest record Rome ever produced, uncarved, unspoken, and intact. Rome grows quiet in the way only old cities can, not through silence but through familiarity. Stone absorbs footsteps. Names repeat until they lose urgency. Evening settles across the forum as if nothing remarkable ever strained the order of things here, and perhaps that is the final illusion Rome perfected best. This story does not end with justice restored or love rewarded. It ends the way many histories do, with balance maintained, names aligned, and discomfort smoothed into forgetfulness. Yet beneath that calm surface, something true remains, carried not in monuments or scrolls, but in the choices that were made when no one was watching closely enough to intervene. If you are still listening, let your breathing slow. Let the tension of ambition and consequence ease from your shoulders. Stories like this are not meant to inflame the heart, but to steady it, to remind us that survival often depends on restraint, and that sacrifice is not always loud enough to be praised. The woman who saved a name was not erased by fate, but by design, and still she endured. The man whose name survived was not triumphant, only permitted to remain. Between them existed a moment where truth was protected without ever being celebrated, and that, perhaps, is the most Roman ending of all. Some histories are written to instruct, others exist only to warn, and a few, like this one, remain unfinished on purpose, so that those who listen closely may recognize how often the world is held together by people it refuses to remember. Let the night settle now, let Rome rest, and carry this story gently the way it was lived, quietly, deliberately, and without expectation of the reward. End of script. Wishing you a wonderful day ahead. May everything unfold kindly for you.